Welcome back, everyone. I'm so excited about this next session because it's such a great segue from the last one. This is the art of giving and receiving feedback. In this session, we're going to learn how to improve performance, accountability, and foster a learning environment with constructive feedback. We'll learn how to solicit feedback and turn sporadic advice into coaching relationships. Will support, motivate, and focus on future-oriented conversations with feed forward. We'll learn more about what that means, and we'll discuss how to navigate and take into consideration diverse backgrounds when giving and receiving feedback. All of you know me, I'll be moderating this session. I am a hands-shoe at Cat 5 Strategies, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you Deb Curry, Manager of Risk Adjustment, ProMedica, and Marissa Smith, Senior Director of Strategic Operations at Episource. I think we'll start by maybe giving a little bit of an intro to each of us and kind of how we came up in our careers. Would that be okay, Marissa and Deb?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, let's start with that. Deb, why don't you go first?
Well, hi. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to be here today. I have actually been in risk adjustment for just a little over 8 years, but I have been in a management since I was 19 years old, believe it or not. Started in a local retail video store, and have worked my way through management there to actually managing a store, and up through the healthcare field, which I've been a part of now for 27 years, and just have worked my way, from customer service person to a manager, and had a lot of good leaders, examples, and mentors along the way. So have learned a lot, and I think my core value system plays a huge role in how I manage and how I, interact on a daily basis. So happy to be here. Happy to maybe share a little bit of that with you and offer some insight.
Marissa?
Sure. So very grateful to be on the panel with both of you. I started my career in the tech startup space. I launched my own company when I was 23 years old, raised venture capital, built a business. So kind of crash course in managing teams. Really didn't know anything. I used to talk about it like building the plane while flying it. And so moved my way through that space, focused actually in logistics and transportation, in a totally different industry. And then began my risk adjustment career moving to the health plan side, building out an in-home nurse practitioner program. So leveraging skills that I had gained in one industry in the healthcare space, and discovered that this is a place where I have a ton of passion. I am really excited about kind of this intersection between technology and healthcare. Joined Episource a year ago. Focused right now in our clinical businesses, so focusing on prospective risk adjustment programs, health risk assessment program, labs and diagnostics, a range of different things. Have a really amazing team that I'm working with now at Episource, and I think that gives you a little bit of insight into who I am.
It sure does. Okay, and I always like to say I'm an accidental healthcare executive. I come from a technology integration background in defense systems, which was a very male-oriented world. And really from there moved accidentally as a volunteer into healthcare, and ended up in government programs and Medicare Advantage at 2 different startups. I've also had 2 startup companies myself, one in technology and my current company in consulting, where I specialize in compliance and quality measures and all things operations in terms of Medicare Advantage plans. So in my past lives, I've had to be more of a maverick and work by myself, where I'm mostly responsible for the work product. And in my current life, I have to be more about leading teams and providing a lot of feedback, especially recently. So that's a little bit about my experience. So glad to participate with you both. So let's just work our way through, some of these questions. So let's just start with the nitty gritty on how do you provide difficult but necessary feedback?
So I'll start. I'll take that one. I think whether it's to help somebody improve in their career or to help someone, like they want to advance or they want to stay right where they're at. But I think it's important to know that if you just don't provide any feedback at all and they don't know where they're standing or how they're performing, they won't know how to improve it. So even though it might be difficult, I always take that approach that, you try to be positive in a difficult situation. So you find the good things that they're doing, and then you kind of go into the more difficult part, and then you end it on, thank you for what you have been doing. I call it a sandwich where the bread is the fluff. So you want to start good so that they, aren't thinking you're attacking them. And then you end it on a good note so they leave the meeting or the encounter, in a positive way. But then the meat is that difficult part, where you have to provide the feedback that says, I know you've been trying and I can see the improvement, but it's not where it needs to be. Can you do this? Can you do that? Offer solutions and suggestions, not just criticizing, but seriously constructive criticism to help their growth and improvement in specific areas. But always kind of like to crunch it in between so that they leave feeling happy and encouraged and almost engaged. Like, yeah, I want to do this. They're enthusiastic about that change and really showing then how this can help their future. I have one person in particular who came to mind when we were doing this. She was going through a very difficult time in her personal life, and it overlapped into her professional life. And it's very difficult when you have to have those conversations, especially when on a personal level. So I would sit her down and say, okay, I'm taking off my Deb Curry friend hat. I'm now putting on my Deb Curry manager, cares about your professional status hat. And so you kind of sometimes have to separate the two.
That's really great, the two hats, and just kind of making that a visual for the person is really interesting. How about you, Marissa?
I really like what you said, Deb, about kind of coming from a place of care, because I think that when you have to give difficult feedback, if you are doing it from a place of having sort of a sincere interest in the person that you're giving the feedback to, and like that comes from a place of wanting them to be successful, that in my experience has gone over a lot better than when it's sort of feedback for the sake of feedback rather than with some sort of genuine desire for that feedback to be meaningful and actually lead to change. And I think that earlier in my career and a lot of kind of experience that I've had witnessing feedback being given, sometimes it's just because somebody does something that annoys you. And so then you tell them that it annoys you, but not with a kind of like a purpose behind it. And then that just sort of like erodes the trust in the relationship. And it doesn't actually usually lead to them no longer doing the thing that annoys you or that is a problem for their performance. Whereas when I have given feedback and actually like spent the time to think about how it could be the thing that is undermining their success could be done differently, and like actually invest my energy in helping for that to be able to change, that's when I've seen those relationships and those conversations go better, and like so much for the better of the team rather than just kind of making sure that they know that they're underperforming, which unfortunately is something that I've seen a lot, as opposed to this kind of, how can I make sure that this is serving a greater purpose for either the individual or for the broader group.
I think that's so true, what you said about trust, Marissa. And that means that you have to show up all the time to build that relationship of trust longitudinally, right? Over time.
Agree.
Because that way the feedback is so much more likely to be received exactly as you intended it versus some other way, right? So that means that you have to be giving feedback all the time, even really, really good really good feedback as well, not just in the times, you have to make an effort, because sometimes we forget, or we're so busy that we're not putting in the time to give the feedback when they did something fabulous. When somebody really showed up and did something fabulous, we kind of take it for granted. Of course, they know that was great, right? So they have to know that you have their back almost. And so when you establish that relationship of trust, they know already, like Deb said, that you're coming from a place of caring about them, that you're really coming from that place. So that's so, I think both of you made such great points. I had something happen to me where I gave feedback in a terrible way, and it actually happened recently. And I think I was telling you guys when we were prepping for this session, I was telling you what happened, that I had started with a new person, new relationship. We hadn't worked together before. And I gave some very, very direct feedback and just said something like, this can't happen anymore if we're going to work together. And it just blew up. It was just so offensive to that person, that really direct feedback. And when I think back, is we didn't have that relationship of trust to begin with. She didn't know, how I meant it. And later on, I took an assessment, like a professional assessment. And one of the things that said that I do very well, but it can sometimes be a derailer, is be very direct. So, and they asked, I said, really? And they said, well, has this ever derailed you in what you were trying to accomplish? And I thought back to that interaction. So I actually brought my questionnaire into the person. I brought my results in, and I called her in the office, and I said, let's talk about what happened between us. I have something really cool to show you. Look at one of my strengths, but it's also a derailer. So I think providing that moment of vulnerability for her, about myself, right, to her, I think helped build a lot of trust between us. So, so I agree.
Also imagine it created the space for her to then give you feedback if it comes up again, right? Like if you're authentic about, hey, this is a place where I know that I am not perfect, then next time, hopefully, instead of it like blowing up, it now is an opportunity for her to be like, hey, Anna, you're doing that thing again. That is really hard for us in our relationship.
I actually said that to her, right? So that's great, Marissa. I actually said, when this happens again, no one's perfect. Point it out to me, talk to me about it. Just know where I'm coming from, that it's a good place. And think of this, that I'm showing you, and I'll make a greater effort to be conscious of your sensitivities when we're having a conversation. So it was a very interesting lesson for me, even this late after I've been giving feedback for a long time. This was a really interesting lesson to me. So why do you guys think that so many folks, especially women, feel threatened and almost shy away from providing positive feedback to one another?
I think there's this unwritten, unspoken that, oh, if I lift you up, that's going to tear me down. And it's just the opposite. I think I've used the example before that there are millions of stars in the sky, and they equally shine to provide light at night, so you can't diminish your own light by building somebody else up. We as human nature, as creatures, as women walking side by side each other, we have to be able to recognize the good in somebody else and build that up in them, knowing that takes nothing away from me. And I've always said this, that as a leader, I am only as good as the people I lead and what I put into them. And I cannot say, Anna, you mentioned that catch the good. We have to be intentional about not just pointing out the bad that somebody does, because that can tear them down. And people remember, they have a more, the percentages have been shown that they remember the negative thing you say, but not the positive. And think about it for just a minute. If you say, if you have a great experience at a restaurant, how likely are you to say something? If you have a bad experience at a restaurant, you tell 10, 20 different people. And I was just, and then it could be anybody. I was at Kroger's the other day. It's a local grocery store here in Toledo. And the young lady, the bake person, because I don't want to say bake boy, because that's not, it was a young lady. She was wonderful. She was, she took pride in what she was doing. I had forgotten something. I was like, oh, I'll go back in line. And like, no, we'll go get it for you. She came back twice because she got the wrong thing the first time, apologized, and was just really nice. And I made, how many of us, when we go to the grocery store, right, we want to get in, at least me, I don't like to shop. So I want to get in, I want to get out and be done. But as I was walking out, I just was like, you know what? I'm going to stop at that customer service desk and I am going to tell whoever is behind there. And I made a point. It's just who I am. Like I look at their name tags, I know who they are. And I'll say, thank you, John, or thank you, Rosie, or whatever their names are, because I think that's important. Also, they have name tags. My grandkids are like, do you know that, mama? No, they had a name tag, baby boy. And so I made a point to say that, she was wonderful. And I said, because we hear too many complaints and not enough positive re-encouragement, and we have to build one another up. It's human nature. It's who we are.
I think that and I think that's exactly right? Like there is this pattern, particularly for women, right, of feeling like there's only space enough for me. And I do think that one of the problems is that in leadership, we oftentimes don't see more than one woman, right? And so when you have this, so there's a sense of scarcity. And I do think that does kind of reinforce this behavior of let me kind of defend my position and make sure that I am going to be the one who gets that one seat at the table. And my hope is that as that shifts, right? And I joke with my team that I have the inverse problem. I have all women in leadership roles on my team. And I am aggressively, when we interview, trying to find men that would be viable candidates, because I do think that diversity is actually what creates high performing teams and good thought that is creative. But I do fear, right, that some of that behavior and some of that way of elbowing your way to the top is because of this sense that not very many women will have opportunities. And I am hopeful attending a conference like this that actually, right, there are so many women in leadership, and we are starting to see that shift, so that there is enough space for everybody at the table.
And we have to embrace who we are. And Marissa, you made a great point about diversity. I mean, we have to embrace our qualities and who we are and who we were created to be. And we have to, let those shine, embrace them, and then bring into the table the other people. It's that's what makes this diversity is key. So thank you for bringing that up.
In the last session, we were talking about, I think Jessica Lerner brought it up about a few years ago, there were 11 Medicaid health plans in Florida, and there were only 3 female CEOs, and now there's 8 female CEOs within those health plans. But I totally agree with you, Marissa, on there's this sense of scarcity, in leadership, right? We all think, like Deb said, there's one seat at the table, it's got to be mine, but we also have to realize, if you bring a candle into the room to light up the room, your light is not diminished because you gave more light. So we got to make room for more women at the table and support them. So to take the inverse of that last question about providing positive feedback, someone in the audience is asking, well, how do you provide feedback on that, for someone who often sees themselves as exceeding expectation and they're not, because you also have to be good at receiving feedback, right? So how do you give feedback to someone who's not very good at receiving feedback? They take it personally, or they, they think it's offensive.
I think those are kind of 2 categories in my experience. The person who thinks that they're the best thing since sliced bread, and then there's the person who is hypersensitive, and so it is really difficult to give them feedback because they do internalize it in a way that means that it's then hard for them to incorporate that feedback. And I have been a victim of that, where I get some feedback and I go home to my husband, I'm like, I have to quit my job. Like, I'm the worst person in the world. And he's like, well, what did they actually say? And this is a good example of where like men have a different perspective. And he'd be like, you're worried about that comment? Like, that was like 90% good feedback. And this is what Deb said, right? Like 90% good, 10% opportunity. And like, this is an opportunity you totally can, like, you can take that feedback and do something with it. Meanwhile, I am like in despair out of having received that. And so I totally understand why that is then scary to be the person giving feedback, if you understand how painful it can be to receive feedback when you do feel insecure. But what I found with people who are really insecure, I do think sometimes it is sort of what Deb described, of like, you give them positive feedback to make sure that proportionally you're giving more positive feedback and encouraging their strengths, rather than like always hammering the thing that is negative, because that's hard, right? If anytime we have a conversation that's feedback giving and all I say is, here's the way you can improve, here's the way you can improve, then that starts to be like just chipping away at esteem. So I do think there's this importance of balance, but I also think coupling it with like, and now how can we work together so that you can make progress here? Like, what is it that I can do to support you better, so that that way you are able to like take this head on and see progress. And then also like making sure that as that progress happens, I'm very fast to point out that I'm seeing it. Because then I think it does like create this virtuous cycle of confidence that next time you get feedback, like actually this will help you improve. And then you'll be able to see the return on that investment that you're making. With the overconfident person, one of the things that I try to do is to ask them to self-appraise. And so I do the kind of like, nobody's perfect. So you find, like, everybody can find things that they need to improve. And so really like ask them to do that work of self-searching, because it's, for those people, it's just usually not inherent to them that they're supposed to be finding the places of opportunity. And then I've been pleasantly surprised that like when I push for that self-reflection, that then actually people are able to find stuff. And then it also creates a space when they've said, hey, like, these are the 3 things that I've identified. I say like, yeah, I see those too. And then here are some other things that I see. And then like, again, like, what can we do about it? So that you can improve and so that you can achieve like whatever these ambitions that usually the high performer, high self-appraiser has. So those are just some things I found that have worked for me.
I couldn't agree more with you, Marissa. The self-evaluation is key. We do annual evaluations here, and before I even start mine, I make sure that they're doing their own self-evaluation. And when they do see themselves higher than maybe what I had to, that can tend to be difficult, but it's perspective. We all know perspective changes everything. So they may have perceived the question different than I did, or they may have perceived what they're doing. But then it also says something about me as a leader. Did I miss a coaching opportunity throughout the year with them that they see, one particular area higher than what I do? And so then as a leader, I will own that. I was like, well, maybe I should have provided better feedback and I should have provided better coaching. And so I think not only is it a way for that high performer to maybe see things from my perspective, but it's also me to see things from their perspective. If I've never provided feedback, never provided any type of opportunity for them to learn or to grow from, then that was my fault. And so if they receive nothing, so a lot of time the high performers are, in my experience, they're judging them against their peers, but they necessarily may not know how their peers are doing, because you praise in public, discipline in private. So a lot of times they're just judging based on what they think. And then there are going to be individuals that you're just not going to change their mind, and you have to accept that. They just think they're great in their own mind, and that's okay. You just have to know that. And I think, Anna, you made a great point, and I wanted to bring this up, and this is a great area to do that. When we have taken similar, whether it's Myers-Briggs or other assessments, and I had my team do the assessment. So as a leader, you know how your team gives and receives feedback productively. Does that make sense? That if so I could be one way, and if my team member is another way, we're not going to receive feedback the same way. it's kind of like the 5 languages of love. You know, we all receive different things different way, and you have to learn that about that person. And that's where the trust and the relationship building come in.
That's so true. And, I always find that sometimes when I have a gap in, they think they're exceeding expectation and I don't think they're exceeding expectation, I always try to look at myself and see, well, what was my role in that as a leader, right? Because it's different when you're a colleague than when you're a leader. So as a leader, I always try to say, well, what was my role in that gap? So is it because perhaps I didn't set clear expectations? Sometimes I think, well, of course, the goal is obvious. That's the goal. We got to get from here to there. But perhaps those expectations on a more granular level weren't clear to that person. And in those cases, I always find like, well, that's on me. I didn't set the expectation very well. And if I find that I think to myself, well, I shouldn't have to say that we're at this level now where I shouldn't have to say that. Well, then I didn't hire the right person for the job, and I need to coach them up to that level, or I need to get a new person in that role, right? So I always try to find out, what was my role in that. Someone also said they try to create in the audience, someone saying, Amy, thank you for this comment, try to create a culture of assuming the best of others and not to get offended by someone's tone or phrasing, because that can come off as rude, but it has to be that culture of trust and everybody cuts each other a break because they know where everyone's coming from. And, that's so true. I always find myself going back, and even if I didn't quite get along with this person in my last job, I always find that I gravitate towards making them the best candidate for somebody I'm hiring, because I know that person and I know they're going to know me and how I communicate and where I'm coming from. And I think those things are so important. So I think we just need to do a better job of creating that culture of assuming the best of others, like Amy's saying. Don't you guys agree?
100%. And I think a lot of this has to be face to face. I know that it was so hard over the last year, and I understand it. But, verbal communication is just as important as body language. So when you're talking to somebody and maybe they're not receiving it the way you're trying to, bring it forward, you can tell by the way they're shifting in their seat or by the way they're looking at you. And so if they're not receiving the feedback I'm giving, I will ask them kind of like repeat to me what I just said. So what did you hear? To make sure that they heard what I was trying to say and not necessarily twisted it in their head. Like I said it one way, but you heard it a different way. No.
Marissa does.
On the same page.
My negative filter for all things. Everything it means is bad. And usually it's about me, my over personalization, that one too. Yeah, I think, I don't remember where I heard this, but it's been kind of echoing based on Amy's comment, is this idea of like presuming goodwill, which I think is the other thing. It's not just like assuming the best in people, but when things come at me, like when I read an email and my like first response is like, oh, this person is mad at me. This person thinks that whatever. Sort of like, how do I read this email with a filter of presuming goodwill, right? That like the intent of this email is positive, and I think it's especially important with written communication because you can't get tone or body language or anything like that. But like, how do I kind of like shift my perspective to make myself more open to receiving feedback? Because I just have my first thought should be that it's coming from a good place.
That's great. That's a great point.
Okay, so we have tons of questions from the audience, so I want to make sure we get to those. So I'm going to switch to asking those questions, if that's okay with you guys, and then we'll kind of go back and forth with some of the questions that I was going to ask you anyway, okay? So these are all great questions. So sticking on that point of receiving positive feedback, someone asked, how should I approach my manager on setting new expectations and new goals? That's good. Like they want to stretch, right?
That is good. We my director and I, or she's an AVP now, but we sat down and we talked about the characteristics of a good employee and what they are and what they are not, and about, wanting to move forward. And so I have built trust. She's been my director slash AVP now for 6 years. And together we've done great things. We have great trust, great rapport. Prior, even during these last 6 years, I had a vice president who kind of gave some constructive feedback to help me grow. But I've approached Jennifer, who is my AVP now, and what do I need to do to take the next step? Like, where do you see, what is your future that you see with me in the organization? And what do I need to do to grow? Is there some sort of internal class I can take? And so I think you have to have that relationship first. I know that's a theme throughout this entire presentation, but relationship is key. You have to trust the person you're coming to, that she's not going to take offense. Oh, wow, you don't want to work under me anymore? No, I'm not. I want to grow. I want to grow my team. I want them to come to me and say, I don't want to lose you, but I want you to grow. So you have to be comfortable in who you are and where you're at and what you provide to the organization. And don't be afraid to ask those tough questions of, what can I do to improve? What can I do to go to the next level?
And you might even make it some things as innocuous as, hey, what types of things did you read that helped you? Or who inspired you, and why did they inspire you? Or what are some of the things that I can do to expand my knowledge of X, right? Because then you're already putting out there that you're looking to grow and you're looking for, and then if you get some answers there, you can say, well, what should I set up as my goals? Here's what I would like to do. What do you think of those goals? And, or what are the best ways for me to get there? How can the company support me to get there? Or what can I do to make that possible here at the company? I love the company. This is where I want to go. What's the best path? What are the opportunities here? Those are all valid, great questions that I would love for someone to come ask me.
Mm-hmm. I think the other thing that I've recognized is, like, many very big organizations, I think, have enough sort of like bench strength to allow for managers to like really dedicate time to being a manager. But in my experience in startups and now in like healthcare, right, like we all are incredibly busy, and like most managers are also in many regards an individual contributor, meaning that like they're not able to spend as much time as I'm sure a lot of us would love to be able to like be actively thinking about the people underneath them's career and how to develop them, right? Like if we do, it's like fit into a small amount of time when you're not running reports and writing RFP, like all of that kind of stuff. And so one of the things that I've found helpful is, and I do myself, is for me to be proactive, that if I want to move to the next stage, I want there to be new goals, that I think about what those should be and I make suggestions, so that I'm not asking the leader to like blank slate imagine for me what my career should look like and what my goals should be, and instead going and saying like, hey, I want to do this, or I've noticed this gap and I think that we could close this gap by doing X, Y, or Z, or I've done the analysis and I think that actually there is a cost savings opportunity and I'd like to stretch myself by taking that on. Because then, like, yes, they're in a position to say yes or no, and their experience might mean like, hey, we've actually already looked at that and that is not the right path. But then it creates sort of a basis for the conversation rather than saying, hey, blue sky, tell me where you think I should be going. And I oftentimes think those conversations are more efficient for everyone involved, but also demonstrate that you're thinking about the organization and your future in a way that I think demonstrates a real insight that then gives me confidence when people come to me that way, that, oh, this person is thinking about these problems in the right way, and be like, yes, I should give them this opportunity, or this is like an area I didn't even realize we should be investing in, and I have somebody raising their hand to do it. And it's so much easier for me as a leader when that happens than when I have to then go off and spend my weekend. Not that I shouldn't want to do that as a manager, but the reality is I'm so constrained. And so it is a way that it helps me help the other person much more effectively.
Yeah, really great. So, make the space for the conversation to the person that asked that question, and then try to be as specific as possible about what you've observed that you think might be good entrees into new goals, new opportunities, etc. All right, somebody would like us to talk a little bit more about how to turn things around when it went badly, like it was received badly, even though our intention was to give constructive criticism. So I will say, like I said before, I was guilty of that. And for me, first I got to tell you, I was so ticked off. And I myself had to grow in that moment. It was an opportunity for growth for me. And that allowed me to create that vulnerability in myself to share that, to say, look, here is an issue that I have that I need to work on, and I will work on it. And I thought that was a good way to turn things around, and it actually worked in this case. Do you guys have any examples you could share?
I have one. So I had someone at a former company that was actually very eager to take things on, was trying I observed him going to meetings that he wasn't invited to, like really trying to stretch himself, but in ways that were counterproductive and were confusing people because they didn't know why he was there or like what he was doing. It was really just like all over the place. And I needed to give him the feedback. I gave him the feedback about a very specific example because I've learned, right? Like specific examples oftentimes are better. Unfortunately, I was totally wrong about that example. And what he had done was not actually an example of all of the things that I really should have been giving him feedback around. And so he then was really upset with me because I hadn't taken the time to get all of the information. I gave him like irrelevant negative feedback. And he walked away very angry from the conversation. And I did basically what Anna was describing, where I had to be vulnerable and say, like, look, I made a mistake. I meant to be giving you feedback about this broader thing. I was trying to be effective by giving you specific feedback, but you're totally right that and this is as in kind of echoing some things I said before, one of my challenges is that I'm overextended. And so while I was trying to be helpful, I actually missed the mark because I get that this now has eroded our trust. And now I need to think about, and I asked, what can I do now to rebuild this relationship so that when I give you feedback in the future, it can be helpful to you. And the fact that I screwed up also, though, doesn't mean that the feedback I was trying to give isn't valid. And so how can I now give you that feedback in a way that you can hear it? Because the reality was that he was doing things that were compromising the success of the team. And I think my instinct would have been because I screwed up, now I'm going to run away from giving feedback. But I actually had to take it head on and still give the feedback, even though it was an uncomfortable conversation because I had botched the initial attempt. And so a lot of it, I think, is that vulnerability that you were talking about, the not shying away from the difficult conversations, because those are also how I have grown as a leader, is by having those conversations and owning the ways in which I am also not perfect.
Marissa, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think in addition to vulnerability, we need to have thick skin and not take everything so personal. I know, sometimes you'll hear your team, talking behind your back. And at the end of the day, are they talking behind Deb Curry's back, or are they talking behind the manager's back? So no matter who was in this role, no matter who had to provide that feedback, that's how they would take it. So when I was younger, I used to be, because I'm a little bullheaded. Those of you who know me probably aren't surprised by that. And so early on in my career, I really mishandled a lot of different situations. But as I've grown and, been mentored myself, if I do hear the rumbling, I kind of want to let the emotions go first. And then I'll call them in and say, okay, tell me what, tell me how I said it. Tell me what you heard. Tell me how, you took it. And let's talk through this. I wasn't trying to offend you. I wasn't trying to hurt your feelings. Especially if it's somebody that you see growth potential in, so it's like, this was my agenda. I'm sorry you took it this way. So I think a follow-up is necessary. If you just what you did, Anna, you followed up, you went back to them, you said, let's go through this again. Let's talk about it and regroup.
Yeah, that's great. All right. So now a really difficult one. Have you guys had to give negative feedback to your boss? And if you have, how have you handled that?
Well, don't ask what you don't want to hear. So I've done, you know what? Listen, I've done it to myself, and I've given my team a self eval, and I'm like, be honest, be open. I want you to do it. We didn't put names on it. I've had to do that in the past, both professionally and well as in some ministries that I've served in, where the youth pastor wanted some feedback. And it is very hard, but it's necessary to grow. And I saw that growth in both, the youth pastor and as well as my leader, because we're not perfect, and they aren't perfect above us. And I think, again, it goes back to trust. And I approach it as like, can we talk? You said this or you did that. What did you mean? I heard this. I'm not sure if that's what you meant, but that's how I took it. So can we talk through this? And if they came down harsh about something, or I'm like, I appreciate that you did this and and I understand you're going through a lot of pressure, but let's take the time to really discuss this and not be spur of the moment kind of thing. You can do it, and you can have those questions and conversations. Sorry.
I think another tactic, I totally agree, Deb, I like the way that you framed, here's what you didn't assume that you heard it the way that they intended, right? Like you said, here's what I heard. Maybe this is not what you meant, because I do think that it softens it a little bit, rather than kind of coming out and be like, you did this and it made me feel this way. And because you're not assuming this is, again, this presumed goodwill, right? Presume that they didn't mean to do this thing that I'm, feeling upset by or hurt by, or is getting in the way of my being productive and effective. The other thing that I've learned is to ask if the person is in a space where they can receive feedback. I made the mistake. I was reporting to a CEO. The company was in the process of going public. Really difficult situation. Lots and lots of meetings that he was having with, people on the board that were high stress, high stakes. And I had a piece of feedback to give him about kind of how our working relationship was going. And I just made the assumption that because he was on the phone with me, that was the time that I should give the feedback. And it didn't go very well. He didn't react well to the feedback at all. And later he came back and said, you know what? I had just gotten off of 6 hours of meetings that were really challenging. And when you gave me that feedback, it was really hard for me to hear, because I was not in a place, where I was rushing to the next thing. I didn't have the emotional space to take that on. And so I have from that learned that lesson of being like, hey, would this be a good time for me to share with you a little bit about how something has been going? Or do you have making sure that they're in a place where they're ready for it, because that will likely get better results. And that also, by them saying yes, it means that they've bought into having the conversation. And at least for me, that's yielded a lot better results.
For sure. And sometimes also realizing that the other person may not be a benevolent person, right? And sometimes you just want to take all judgment out of it, even if they're not a benevolent person. And you might say something like, help me understand what you were hoping to accomplish with that comment, or with framing it that way, or saying it that way. What were you hoping to accomplish? And that does two things. If it's a benevolent person and they're really hoping to accomplish something good in your interest, in your best interest, they're going to tell you that. And if not, they're going to know that that what they were hoping to accomplish is probably not as noble, right? And they're going to think about that next time. And I think that's a really great way to kind of elicit at least a self-evaluation or a self-awareness in that person that, hey, maybe what they said was not, they shouldn't have said it that way. And I'm not saying, obviously, you're going to be given feedback and you need to be able to take feedback. Feedback is a gift. I say the same thing for grievances in a health plan environment. We love grievances, right? I love to hear when I'm missing the mark because that's how I grow and how I get better, right? So you need to have that experience, but always when you're trying to give feedback to the other person, I was like, hey, what were you trying to say with that? What were you trying to accomplish here with this action that I have to now give you bad feedback about? So, all right, guys.
So one thing I'd say that's different between grievances and feedback is that feedback is not complaining, which I do think is a mistake that people make. Is like feedback is not just me airing all of the ways in which I am unhappy with a situation. It is important, I think, unlike customers and members who are allowed to complain all day, like it is important to come with some intent at resolution. And I think that is like one of the things that separates good feedback from bad feedback.
100%. I think that makes such a big difference, right? When you're coming with intent to resolution versus here's a problem, right? So that's great. All right, ladies, it is 3:00 Eastern time, which means this time has absolutely flown by. It was such a joy to interact with the audience and with the two of you in this really wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for sharing this time with me and giving all of your vulnerabilities and insights on how to give and receive feedback. I know folks were really intrigued by what we had to say. So thanks so much for your insights. Very much appreciated. All right, so we're getting ready to take a break. There is a video right after our presentation here called The Art of Mindful Communication. Is about present awareness and how to show up with compassion for yourself and others. So stay tuned for the video, and then we will see everybody back at 3:15 for the next session, which is the magic of authenticity at the workplace.